My wife took me to her firm's anniversary dinner so I could watch her accept an award while her managing partner's hand disappeared under the tablecloth. She looked across the room at me and smiled. Not an accident. Not a nervous glance. A smile. The kind that says, "I know you see this. And there is nothing you can do about it." 37 seconds later, Elliot Graves was on his knees on a marble floor with blood running down his chin and a look on his face that rich men only get when they've forgotten that the world still contains consequences. My name is Marcus Holt. I'm 52 years old. I've been teaching high school history at Westfield Academy in Columbus, Ohio for 24 years. I know what you're thinking. A teacher. What kind of man lets himself end up in a story like this? The honest answer is the kind who loved his wife more than he respected himself, the kind who kept telling himself that the distance growing between them was stress, was ambition, was the natural pressure of two people on very different roads. The kind who stopped looking at the road signs years ago and just kept driving. Diana came into my life at 29. She was finishing her last year at Ohio State Law School when we met at a friend's cookout. Sharp mind, louder laugh than you expect, and this way of leaning forward when she talked to you that made you feel like the only person in the room. I was 31, already teaching, already settled into the kind of life that looks small on paper but feels solid underneath. I wasn't what she imagined for herself. I know that now. I think I knew it then too. But love makes you reckless with the things you know. We married in 2001. She passed the bar 6 months later and joined Henderson, Graves & Associates as a junior associate. By the time our son Owen came along, adopted in 2004, because Diana said she'd been told there were complications, that pregnancy might not be possible, she was already climbing. 2 years after Owen, Sophie was born. 3 years after that, Caleb. The complications had apparently resolved themselves. I told myself it was a miracle. I told myself a lot of things. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, heavy envelope, gold embossing, the kind of paper that announces its own importance before you've even read the words. Henderson & Graves was celebrating its 40th anniversary. Black tie. Downtown Hilton. Diana slid it across the kitchen counter to me without looking up from her phone. You need to be there. 9 o'clock. Don't be late and don't wear the gray suit. Then she was gone, heels clicking down the hallway, door closing behind her with a quiet certainty. Owen looked up from his cereal. He was home for the weekend junior year at Denison. You going? Apparently I am. He stirred his coffee. Dad. Just the one word, the way he's always done since he was 16. One word that carries a whole conversation inside it. I know, son. Do you? He set down his spoon. Because from where I'm sitting, you've been disappearing for 2 years, and she doesn't even notice. I didn't have an answer for that. Not because it wasn't true. Because it was entirely true, and I had nothing left to put in its place. The signs had been accumulating the way they always do, quietly, layered over each other until you can't see the floor anymore. Elliot Graves had been managing partner at the firm for 11 years, and Diana had been working closely with him for the last 4. Close, she said, in the way that ambitious people worked closely when they were building something. Close, in the way that explained why his name appeared more often in her sentences than mine did. Close in the way that explained the cologne I didn't recognize on her coat collar on a Wednesday night when she said she'd been at a deposition until 10. She talked about him the way people talk about someone who has rearranged their internal furniture. Elliot thinks the Donnelly case needs a different approach. Elliot says, I'm ready to make partner. Elliot believes the firm's future is in corporate litigation, and I should position myself accordingly. Elliot. I met him twice. Both times he shook my hand and held it a beat too long, and looked at me with the polite pity that successful men reserve for people they've already decided don't matter. The night I found the credit card statement was a Thursday. I wasn't looking for anything. I was trying to find the electric bill in the desk drawer, and I pulled out a folded page instead. Restaurant receipts I didn't recognize. A hotel charge for a weekend in April when Diana said she'd been at a conference in Cincinnati, $340 at a place called the Lantern Inn in Granville. Small town. Quiet. 45 minutes from Columbus. The kind of place you go when you don't want to be recognized. I put it back. Folded it exactly as I found it. Sat in the kitchen in the dark for an hour. Then I started paying attention. I'm a history teacher. My entire profession is built around reading evidence, tracing patterns, understanding how one thing leads to another when people think nobody's watching. I'm better at this than I'd like to be. Over the next 3 weeks, I found more. A second credit card I hadn't known about, opened in her name alone. Charges at restaurants I'd never visited. On evenings I'd been home with the kids while she worked late. A weekend in March when Owen was at school, Sophie was at a volleyball tournament, and Caleb was at his grandmother's. And Adri. And Diana said she'd been catching up on casework at the office. I checked the office parking garage records through a contact I have on the building management board. Her car wasn't there. The GPS tracker I ordered cost $40. I installed it in 20 minutes on a Saturday morning while she was at yoga. The pattern clarified within 10 days. Every other Friday, her car drove to a residential address in Bexley. Upper-class neighborhood. Quiet streets. The kind of place where everyone has a lawn service and nobody asks questions. I looked up the address. Property records were public. The house was owned by Elliot D. Graves. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I made an appointment with Patricia Dowd, the attorney who had drafted our prenuptial agreement in 2001. Patricia was 64, semi-retired, kept a small practice out of a Victorian on Fifth Avenue. She had the manner of someone who had watched too many marriages collapse to be surprised by any of it anymore. When I laid out what I had, she read everything without expression, then looked up over her reading glasses. "The fidelity clause is solid," she said. "The language covers sustained extramarital conduct. You got documentation of financial concealment, which strengthens it further." She folded her hands. "Marcus, this is a good prenuptial agreement." She paused. "She signed it voluntarily. She thought it was unnecessary," I said, "but she signed it." Patricia smiled, just a little. "They always think it's unnecessary." I also did something I'd been putting off, something I was afraid of in a way that I'm not sure I can fully explain. I ordered a DNA testing kit. 3 of them, cheek swabs, sent to a lab in Pennsylvania under a name that wasn't mine. Owen. I already knew. Biology wasn't the question with him. But Sophie had been conceived 2 years after Diana's supposed complications resolved. And Caleb, 3 years after that, during a stretch of time when I'd already started to feel the distance between us like a physical thing. Like furniture rearranged in a room I thought I knew. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it didn't matter, that they were my children regardless. I told myself a lot of things on the drive to FedEx. I sent the package anyway. The results came back 9 days before the gala. Sophie was mine. The relief of that hit me so hard I had to sit down. Caleb's results were inconclusive on the first test. I ordered a second. The second came back 4 days later. I read the probability figure 3 times. Then I closed the laptop and went for a 2-hour walk in the cold. Caleb was mine. The number was 99.97%. I'd worked myself into a fear that turned out to be unfounded. And the relief of being wrong about that one thing was so overwhelming that I almost lost sight of everything I hadn't been wrong about. Almost. Owen found me in the garage that Saturday the same way sons always seem to find their fathers when fathers are pretending to sort through old boxes and actually just staring at the wall. "Dad, what is it?" Again, not a question. A fact about the world. I looked at my oldest son, 20 years old, studying political science at Denison, the boy we'd brought home at 4 years old, when Diana had looked at me across a hospital waiting room and said, "Yes, him. I want him to be ours." 20 years ago. Before ambition ate her from the inside out. "Sit down, son," I said. I told him everything. Not the way you tell someone bad news. The way you tell someone the truth when you've been carrying it alone long enough. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "The prenup." "Yes." "And you've already talked to an attorney." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Good." He looked at the floor. "I heard her on the phone 6 months ago, Dad. In her office, door not quite shut. She was laughing about something, and she said that marrying a teacher was the most romantic mistake she ever made." His voice was steady, calibrated the way it gets when he's holding something down. "She said she should have known better. That she and Elliot understood each other in ways she'd never been able to explain to you." He met my eyes. "I almost told you then. I should have. You were protecting me. I was wrong to." He stood up. "You were protecting me. I was wrong to." He stood up. "Whatever you're doing, I'm with you. Sophie and Caleb too. We all see it. We've seen it for a long time." The night of the anniversary dinner, I dressed carefully. Dark charcoal suit, white shirt, the tie Diana had given me 3 years ago, the one I'd worn to her promotion party. The last night I remember feeling like her husband instead of her logistics problem. I looked in the mirror. 52 years old. Wider in the shoulders than I was at 30. Quieter in the shoulders than I was at 30. The look of a man who has made a decision and is no longer afraid of what it costs. Diana came out of the dressing room in midnight blue, structured, expensive, precise. She looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you're considering replacing. Ready? She was already checking her phone. The drive downtown was silent. She didn't ask about my week. Didn't mention Owen's visit, or Sophie's volleyball, or the robotics competition Caleb had just placed second in. Her thumbs moved across her screen the entire drive, and I watched the Columbus skyline fill the windshield and thought about how you can lose a person so gradually that you don't notice the exact moment they're gone. The downtown Hilton ballroom was everything I expected and nothing I belonged to. Vaulted ceilings, champagne towers, men in suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, talking about billable hours like they were box scores. Diana's name tag waited at the front registration desk. Diana Holt, senior partner, Henderson and Graves. Mine said Marcus Holt. No affiliation, no title, just a name attached to someone who mattered. The woman at registration smiled. Ms. Holt, your firm is reserved table 2. Mr. Holt, you're at table 14. She said it so naturally, as if this were a reasonable thing. Diana didn't blink. That's fine, Marcus doesn't mind. And then she walked away toward the front of the room, toward the candlelit center of things, toward the life she'd decided was hers. And I walked to table 14 near the back wall and sat down next to a young paralegal from Cincinnati who was kind enough to pretend this was normal. The speeches started. Senior partners talking about legacy and vision and the courage to build something lasting. Corporate language shaped like sincerity. Then Elliot Graves walked to the podium. 57 years old, silver-haired. The kind of man who has practiced every gesture in a mirror until it looks effortless. He talked about the firm's future, about the exceptional talent they'd developed over 4 decades. His eyes moved to Diana when he said exceptional talent, and hers moved back to him, and something passed between them in that glance that had nothing to do with the firm's 40th anniversary. Then I saw his hand move. Under the table, her posture shifted, subtle, comfortable, like settling into something familiar. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She turned her head toward him and laughed quietly at something he said, and I watched my wife let another man touch her in a room full of their colleagues while I sat near the service entrance like something she'd almost remembered to leave at home. I watched her glance across the room at me, found my eyes, held them for just a moment, and smiled. Not by accident. She wanted me to see this. She'd always wanted me to see this. The invitation hadn't been courtesy or obligation. It was a demonstration, a closing argument. This is what I have, and this is what you are, and there is nothing you can do about either. 10 minutes, I told myself. Elliot excused himself from table 2 exactly 12 minutes after his hand appeared under the tablecloth. I counted. He straightened his jacket, bent to say something close to Diana's ear that made her touch his sleeve, and walked toward the corridor leading to the outdoor terrace. The smoking terrace. I'd noted it when we arrived. Quiet, dark, accessible from the side hallway without crossing the main floor. I stood up. The paralegal from Cincinnati was deep in a conversation about contract law. No one at my table noticed. I walked through the ballroom with the same measured pace I use when a classroom is about to tip sideways and I need to hold the center. Past the cocktail tables, past the ice sculpture, past the registration desk where my name tag had announced my insignificance to the world. The terrace was dimly lit. Stone pavers, potted boxwoods trimmed to perfect cubes, a view of the parking structure and the Columbus skyline beyond it. Elliot stood at the far railing with a cigarette. The kind of man who only smokes at events because it gives him a reason to step away from accountability. He heard me coming. Turned. His expression did the thing that men like him always do when someone unexpected walks toward them with purpose. It shifted into hospitality first, then uncertainty, then the particular smirk that comes from a lifetime of being protected by money. Marcus. He said it like we were old friends running into each other somewhere pleasant. Didn't peg you as a smoker. I'm not. I stopped 8 feet away. Close enough for clarity. I'm here because you're going to apologize. The smirk steadied itself. For what exactly? For putting your hands on my wife at the table. With me in the room. He exhaled slowly. The cigarette described a small arc. I think you may have misread a situation. I watched it for 12 minutes. Diana and I work closely. We're colleagues. We have a Rapport. If that's uncomfortable for you. He spread his free hand. That sounds like a conversation you need to have with her. Not me. I'm having it with you. He looked at me the way men look at problems they've already decided are manageable. Marcus, let me be straightforward with you. He turned toward the railing, the city skyline. Diana is extraordinary. She has built a career here that most attorneys twice her seniority couldn't match. She's going to be named managing partner within the next 18 months. She has arrived somewhere that, respectfully, your life and mine simply don't intersect. He glanced back. That's not a criticism. You teach. That's honorable. But Diana and I operate in a world with different stakes, different pressures. What looks like something from the outside isn't always. You've been taking her to your house in Bexley every other Friday for at least 4 months, I said. The words came out flat. Informational. The way I state dates in a classroom. He went very still. The Lantern Inn in Granville, March 14th. The restaurant on Broad Street, the one with the private dining room, 17 dinners over 8 months. A credit card opened in January that she told no one about. I watched his face. You're going to apologize. He dropped the cigarette, grounded under his shoe. When he looked up, the performance of friendliness was completely gone. What was underneath it was colder and more honest. You have no idea what you're walking into. I know exactly what I'm walking into. I have lawyers who. So do I. He took a step forward. A dominance move. The kind that works on people who have decided he has power over them. You hit me and I will bury you. Do you understand that? I will make what's left of you a Kendak. I hit him once. Left hand. Tight arc. Landed clean on the hinge of his jaw. Not a swing. A decision. He went sideways into the boxwood, one knee to the pavers, hands out to catch himself. The cigarette case clattered out of his jacket pocket and spun across the stone. He stayed on his knee for a moment that stretched out in the cold air. Blood at the corner of his mouth. His silver hair fallen across his forehead for the first time in probably 30 years. He looked, for one moment, exactly like what he was. A man who had made himself untouchable by accumulating things and people, and had just encountered the edge of what that protection actually covered. That's for my wife, I said. And for my kids. And for the 18 months you thought you had left. I straightened my jacket. The apology wasn't optional. It just became irrelevant. I walked back through the side corridor, through the ballroom, stopping only to set my water glass down at table 14, where the paralegal from Cincinnati was still talking about contracts. You all right? She asked. You were gone a while. Needed some air, I said. Beautiful night. 3 minutes later, the murmur started. A figure in the corridor. Hotel staff moving quickly. Then Elliot Graves walked through the main ballroom entrance with his hand pressed to his jaw and his perfect composure fractured in every direction. The room didn't go silent all at once. It went silent in concentric circles, table by table, as people registered what they were seeing. Managing partner of Henderson and Graves, silver hair disheveled, blood on his collar, walking through his own firm's anniversary dinner, looking like a man who'd been reminded of something he'd forgotten. Diana stood up from table 2. I watched the color drain from her face. She scanned the room and found me at table 14. I raised my water glass slightly. Her expression moved through 3 stages fast. Confusion, then calculation, then something I hadn't seen on her face in years. Fear. Real fear. Not of violence. Of consequence. Security reached Elliot before he made it to the executive tables. Diana grabbed her evening bag and followed. The ballroom filled with the particular sound of scandal moving through an expensive room. The hush, and then the flood of whispers. Phones appearing. People angling their chairs. I finished my water, thanked the paralegal from Cincinnati for the conversation, and walked to the coat check. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked questions. I was just Diana Holt's husband. The teacher. The man near the back wall. Except that, as of about 6 minutes ago, I was the story everyone in that room was going to be telling tomorrow. I drove home on surface streets. No radio. Just the sound of the city at night. When I came through the front door, Owen was in the living room with Sophie and Caleb. Some action movie playing on low volume. Owen stood up. You're early. Where's Mom? Still there. He looked at me. Really looked? What happened? Nothing that wasn't due. Sophie turned from the TV. Dad, your hand. I looked down. The knuckles were red. The skin had split slightly on 2 of them. Nothing serious. The honest record of one precise moment. Scraped it, I said. I'll clean it up. Caleb looked at the hand and then at my face with 14-year-old directness. Did you hit someone? I met his eyes. Go to bed, bud. School tomorrow. Owen followed me to the kitchen and watched me run cold water over my hand without saying anything for a moment. Elliot Graves? Yes. He was quiet. Good. He leaned back against the counter. What now? In the morning I call Patricia Dowd and tell her to file. Prenuptial agreement. Clause 9. Extramarital conduct constituting public and professional harm to the other spouse. We file before she has a chance to move any assets. She'll fight it. She'll lose. Owen looked at me for a long moment. The way he's looked at me for a long moment. The way he's looked at me since he was a kid when he's trying to decide whether the world is still structurally sound. Are you okay, Dad? Yes, I said, and I meant it in a way I hadn't meant anything in a long time. Diana came home at 2:15. I was sitting in the armchair in the dark living room, which is apparently what fathers do in stories like this. And I'm not sure I would have done it differently, even if I'd been trying to avoid the cliché. She stopped in the doorway, saw me. Marcus, Diana, what you did tonight was sit down. She didn't sit. She stood in the doorway in her midnight blue dress with her perfect posture and her firm's anniversary favor bag in one hand, and she looked at me with the expression she uses in depositions when she's recalibrating. Elliot is going to press charges. You assaulted him in front of nobody. The terrace was empty. There are witnesses. Then let him press charges. Let's have all of that conversation publicly. She opened her mouth, closed it. The deposition phase slipped. How long have you known? Longer than you'd like. I stood up, crossed the room, stopped close enough for her to understand that this conversation was no longer the kind where she set the terms. I want to know why you invited me tonight. She looked away. Appearances. Diana. Her jaw tightened. I needed you there. You needed me there to see it. Silence. How many? She looked back. What? Before Elliot? How many others? The silence this time was the answer. I walked to the entryway table and picked up the envelope Patricia Dowd had prepared 3 days ago. This is the prenuptial agreement we signed in 2001. Page 3, Clause 9. The language is specific and it's been supported with documentation for the past 6 weeks. I held it out. She took it with careful hands. Read the highlighted section. You can't. It's already filed. Patricia submitted the paperwork this afternoon. She looked up. Her eyes moved across my face like she was searching for something she'd misplaced a long time ago. You planned this. You invited me to your firm's anniversary dinner and let your affair partner touch you across a ballroom while I sat near the service entrance. You looked at me and smiled. I held her gaze. One of us planned this. It wasn't me. I just prepared for it. I walked to the front door and opened it. I need you to go stay somewhere else tonight. Monday morning the locks change. Patricia's office will be in touch about the timeline. The kids stay here. Owen is 20. He'll tell any court exactly what he's witnessed. Sophie and Caleb will be asked where they want to be. I looked at her. You already know the answer to that. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. The city night behind her, the house we'd built 21 years ago, in every direction around her. I didn't mean for it to. I know, I said. And I did know. That was the part that still hurt. That she hadn't meant for any of it. She'd just made 1,000 small decisions that added up to everything. She walked past me to her car. I closed the door, locked it, stood in the quiet house, and listened to the sound of her engine disappearing down the street. The next 8 weeks were the kind of weeks that compressed time. Patricia filed. Diana's attorney, a sharp woman from a downtown firm who charged $400 an hour, challenged the prenup's fidelity clause on 3 separate grounds. Patricia dismantled each one at a preliminary hearing in less time than it takes to grade a stack of sophomore essays. The video evidence was what sealed it. Someone at the gala had posted a 12-second clip to social media that same night. Table 2, Elliot and Diana. The movement under the table. Her posture. Her laugh. It had several thousand views before the night was over. By Monday, it had been picked up by a legal industry blog and shared in attorneys' circles with the kind of gleeful condemnation that people reserve for hypocrisy from people they're already tired of. Elliot Graves retained 2 attorneys and threatened to press charges. The Columbus PD detective who contacted me was a methodical woman named Raines, who asked her questions without inflection and listened to my answers the same way. I told her exactly what happened. She showed me Elliot's account. I showed her the GPS records, the hotel receipts, the credit card statements, the social media video. She read everything without expression. 3 days later, she called and told me that Elliot Graves had declined to pursue charges. Given the totality of documentation, she said carefully, it was determined that pursuing the matter was unlikely to be in his interest. I thanked her and called Patricia. The firm placed Elliot on administrative leave within 2 weeks of the gala. The board had apparently been managing complaints about his conduct for longer than anyone had officially acknowledged, and the video had removed the last of their cover. He resigned 6 weeks later with a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. He was not named managing partner. Diana was not either. The divorce hearing was a Tuesday morning in Franklin County Family Court. Judge Emery was 61, patient, precise, and had no tolerance for what he called in his opening remarks, the strategic deployment of victim on it. Diana's attorney tried 3 approaches. The prenup was signed under pressure. The evidence had been gathered through invasive surveillance. Marcus Holt's act of violence at the gala invalidated his claim to clean hands. Patricia responded to the first with the email Diana had sent her own attorney in 2001 saying the agreement was fair and she was signing freely. She responded to the second by noting that GPS tracking a jointly owned marital vehicle was not illegal in Ohio. She responded to the third by playing the 12-second video and asking the court to consider the broader context of the evening. Judge Emery watched the video twice. Owen testified for 19 minutes. Calm, factual, devastating. He described what he'd observed over 3 years. The phone calls Diana stepped outside to take. The name Elliot spoken more than any other in their household. The comment he'd overheard 6 months before the gala about the marriage being a romantic mistake. Diana's attorney cross-examined him, and Owen answered every question with the same quiet precision until she stopped asking. The judge ruled in full enforcement of Clause 9. The house. The shared accounts. Primary custody of Sophie and Caleb. Diana received her personal vehicle, her individual retirement account, and the professional reputation she still had left, which was less than she'd started the morning with. She cried when the ruling was read. I watched her and felt, honestly, not satisfaction and not cruelty, something more like grief. For the version of her I'd married, the woman with the loud laugh at a backyard cookout who'd lean forward when she talked to me like I was the only person there. That woman had made choices that led her to this courtroom. I couldn't follow her through all of them, and I couldn't carry her out. Outside on the courthouse steps, Sophie hugged me without saying anything for a long time. Caleb shoved his hands in his pockets and looked at the street and said, "Can we get breakfast? I'm starving." Owen put his hand on my shoulder, and we stood there in the November cold, and I thought about the GPS tracker and the DNA kits and the midnight drive and whether a man was defined by the things he did when he was afraid. And I decided that he wasn't. He was defined by what he did with what he found out. 11 months after the gala, the school year was in its 2nd semester, and I was teaching a unit on reconstruction, the messy, incomplete, ongoing kind, the kind that never fully resolves but keeps moving anyway. And I thought that was probably right as a metaphor. And I decided not to dwell on it further, because metaphors are for essays, not Tuesday afternoons. Elliot Graves had moved to a consulting role at a real estate firm in Cincinnati. I heard this from a colleague and didn't think about it again. Diana had taken a position at a regional firm in Pittsburgh. She called Sophie once a week and Caleb every other. Both of them answered when they felt like it, which was sometimes. I didn't tell them to be kinder about it. I also didn't tell them to be harder. These were their feelings, and they were allowed to hold them at whatever distance felt right. Owen graduated in May with honors. He was applying to law schools in the fall. He sat across from me at the kitchen table one Sunday and said, "I want to do family law. I want to help people who don't have Patricia Dowd." I told him that was a good reason to practice anything. Sophie had narrowed her college list to 4 schools. She was looking at pre-med, which made me proud in a way I couldn't fully articulate out loud without embarrassing myself. Caleb was building a weather monitoring station in the backyard using salvaged equipment and a tutorial he'd found online. He asked me one evening while we were grilling whether I thought he could ever understand everything about how weather systems work, really understand it. All the way down, I told him that was the right question to start with. He thought about that for a while. "Is that true for everything?" he asked. "Most things worth knowing," I said. A colleague from the school's science department, a woman named Joanna Reeves who had started the previous September, stopped by my classroom one afternoon in March, with a question about a primary source I'd referenced in the school newsletter. We ended up talking for 40 minutes. She had the kind of directness that came from being actually curious rather than performing curiosity. And she laughed at the right moments without performing that either. She asked me about Westfield's archives and whether I'd considered submitting the Reconstruction curriculum to the state board as a model framework, which no one had ever asked me before. 3 weeks later, she came by again, this time without a stated reason, which I understood and appreciated. We had coffee in the faculty lounge, and she told me about her previous school. And I told her about the last 2 years and the inexact shorthand people use when they're testing whether the other person can be trusted with more. She could. It was too early to know where that led. I was in no hurry to find out. One evening in April, all 3 kids and I made dinner together. Sophie's idea. She'd found a recipe online, something involved with mushrooms and fresh pasta, and Caleb was in charge of the salad, which he took extremely seriously. Owen was home for the week, and he set the table and put on some music, and the kitchen was loud and warm and full of people who had chosen each other through all of it. After dinner, Caleb looked up from his plate. "Dad, are you different now?" Sophie shot him a look. "Caleb." "What?" "I just mean, you seem different." I thought about it. "Maybe," I said. "How?" He thought for a moment. "Like, you're still here. You're more here." Owen smiled into his pasta. I looked at my youngest son, 14 years old, building weather stations in the yard, asking the right questions. "Yeah," I said, "that's about right." My marriage had ended in a Columbus courtroom on the Tuesday morning, and I had walked out of it with my children, my integrity, and the slow relearning of what it meant to take up space in my own life. The story went places I hadn't intended. I did things I hadn't imagined myself capable of. Some I'm at peace with. Some I'm still measuring. But I had stopped being the man at table 14, the one near the service entrance, waiting to be noticed. I had stopped waiting, and everything that came after that, the hard parts and the quiet parts and the Tuesday evening pasta and the colleague who asked the right questions, all of it came from that one decision. To stop being invisible. To decide that I mattered. It turned out that was the only decision that was ever really mine to make.